Hi everybody! Welcome to our Orchard Project Apple Day 2020. We're really excited to have Nick Gates here, and Nick has quite a few strings to his bow. Just to introduce you, Nick is a documentary producer and TV producer, a photographer, a naturalist, a writer and a beekeeper, amongst many other things I'm sure. And he's based in Bristol. Hi Nick.
Hello Joe, thank you for having me.
How's it going today?
Yes, well, I'm actually here in Ireland, so backdrop's a little bit different from my normal garden backdrop, which I prefer to do these sorts of calls in, but I'm out on location filming, so we've got a bit of a down weather day, so I thought it'd be a good moment to chat with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Great stuff. I'm really glad you could join us from over there in Ireland. So we're here to talk about Nick's new book. That's just been released, published 2 months ago. So it's really new and it's already out there in any major bookshops and online. The book is co-authored with Nick's friend and fellow naturalist, Benedict MacDonald. And it's a fabulous, poetic and evocative account of an orchard in Herefordshire over the course of a year. So I understand that you and Benedict spent 5 years observing this orchard. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, that is. I mean, maybe even 6 years. We've spent a real, we've spent a good few hours of our life in that orchard. It started off as a nest box project and a photography project. We were trying to document all of the different species that used this particular old traditional cider orchard, and the project just gradually grew from there. Year on year, we just built more and more anecdotal stories that between us, Ben and I, had both seen in the orchard, and it got to the point where we decided that we should write a book about it. We'd filled so many hard drives full of interesting pictures and field diaries full of interesting notes that we thought we really had to share the story of this wonderfully wild place.
That's brilliant. We're really excited to see orchards on bookshelves now as well, and to see the spotlight on these as wonderful wildlife habitats. And I think they don't get enough coverage or attention in that light. So I'm curious to know why orchards, really. I suppose as naturalists you probably observe plenty of different types of landscapes. So what drew you to orchards?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one of those places, as you say, Ben and I have both traveled. We're both wildlife producers. We've both traveled extensively. We've been fortunate to see wildlife all over the world, but we've both got a passion for British wildlife, and there are certain species that are really declining in the UK, unfortunately, due to the landscape changing. And there are many species that can be found in really good quality traditional orchards, and particularly this one, which Ben found a few years before we started visiting it together. Species like lesser spotted woodpeckers and redstarts and spotted flycatchers and all manner of rarer insects as well. And we found, just by slowly working away at this orchard, spending more time there, we realized that it was easily as good as many nature reserves that we also spend time in. The orchard is run by two quite visionary wildlife farmers, and they have really engaged with the land and made sure that it's providing for as many different species as possible. And they were kind enough to let us share that and sort of adopt that orchard for us to be able to visit when we were able to.
That's amazing. What a great opportunity. It's really nice to hear that there are still farmers out there who value orchards as well, and are keeping them in such a traditional state, I suppose. So having read parts of the book myself, I have to say it's really poetically written, and it's a really beautiful testimony to kind of how these spaces could be if we let them be as wild as they can be. And I suppose, as coming from the point of view of the Orchard Project, I'd really recommend all our budding orchardists to read it, because we usually come at an orchard from the point of view of what humans do there, and we're all about community and getting people involved in orchards. So we put a lot of focus on events that bring people in, on Blossom Day picnics and wassails, and reviving some of these traditional events, as well as newer things like orchard bathing and yoga and mindfulness, and creating a sense of community and neighbourhood action around these spaces. So it's really amazing to read this book and come at the orchard from the angle of nature, and really think about the viewpoint of the creatures that live there and how they experience it.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's a really important point, is that, you know, going into the 21st century, or now we're well into the 21st century, you know, space is quite limited, and wherever possible, we should be sharing our spaces with wildlife. And, you know, wildlife, you know, farmers come under a lot of pressure from, you know, different opinions as to how they manage their land. And it's wonderful to see. And there are an awful lot of really good quality farmers out there who are really engaging and really making sure that their land, wherever possible, is providing for wildlife in the areas that it's not providing for people. And in the case of orchards, particularly ones traditionally managed like this, that, you know, almost everything they do there also benefits wildlife.
It's fantastic. And I suppose it's that sense of respecting all the other creatures that are in a space. We often think it's just us, and the humans are the ones that dominate that landscape. So it's lovely to read it from the point of view of the butterflies and the birds, and how they see the fruit trees and what they get out of the fruit trees, as opposed to just us picking, harvesting and juicing. so
yeah, completely. And that's sort of the traditional approach to being in an orchard, I think, is to look at it from the apples perspective. But as naturalists, we wanted to look at it from the wildlife perspective and see what they were getting from it. And it's something we've really enjoyed doing.
Well, it is Apple Day as well, though, so we do have to think about the apple perspective.
Yep. Yep. We can't look at orchards without looking at apples and peri pears, but apples.
Yeah. So what I've asked Nick to do today is to read a passage from the book. I'll hopefully show you just how beautiful it is, how astute it is, how informative and fascinating it is as a read. And we've chosen a passage from October. Just to be clear, the book is told through a year, so it's broken down into chapters by each month. And since it's October, we thought we'd read you a passage about windfall in October. Do you want to go ahead, Nick?
Yeah, so Ben and I split the months, and this is from one of Ben's chapters. Each afternoon, the windfall.
Listen.
Each afternoon, the windfalls of October concentrate a whole ecosystem of predators and prey within the crunchy carpet of the orchard's sheltered floor. By late evening, badgers slowly shuffle forth into the orchard, drawn to the bounty, in particular, of the flaky bark pear. Here, with the discernment of fine diners, the badgers remain so fond of this particular fruit that a latrine nearby shows the regularity of their visits. The influx of bank voles, field voles, wood mice, and yellowneck mice, chiseling away at the fallen fruits, draws in a host of predators. Buzzards can be seen perched unusually low in the wide-branched strawberry normans, waiting for an incautious or inebriated rodent to nail. Late evening sees teenage tawny owls already being shifted out of their parents' territories, waiting patiently in the lower branches of the oaks, in the certain knowledge that soon the windfalls will be furry with food. October is a wonderful time for young owls. In recent years, red admirals, which once migrated south into mainland Europe, are increasingly surviving our ever milder winters, and in the orchard, the sugars they will need to see them through the hard times now lie in abundance on the ground. Admirals are showy creatures, and they do not do things by halves. They will often drink well over the limit, and in contrast to their elegant reputation in the animal kingdom, these butterflies become drunk and very disorderly. There we go.
That's brilliant. It just paints a really evocative picture with those red admirals getting tipsy on the apples. Really beautiful. Yeah, and it goes on to talk about which butterflies hibernate in winter, which don't, which I never knew, and it's incredible. And I feel like I'm even just after delving into a couple of chapters, I'm looking at hedgerows and rot holes in very different light now. So
Yeah, and that's something that happened to us as well. The longer we spent in the orchard year on year, we noticed the same thing. Is you just begin to see all these little tiny habitats within the overarching orchard habitat, and you appreciate each of those small elements more.
Yeah, it's not ecosystems within ecosystems. Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, great. So Nick is also going to treat us to a preview of some of the amazing photographs that are in the book. It's got a lovely central part in the middle with a few double page spreads, and well, I won't give too much away because you have to go and buy a copy to see. But he's going to select maybe just 4 different creatures that that he and Ben found in this orchard in Herefordshire, and talk us through those in the hope that perhaps some of you will be able to go out and spot them yourselves as well.
Yeah. So I'll just share my screen here with you, Jo, and
yeah, great.
Can you see a picture, I hope, of a rhinoceros beetle?
I've got him. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a species which can be found simply when given the chance. They thrive in both urban and rural habitats. They're not looking for anything but deadwood. That's all they need to thrive, because that's where they lay their eggs and that's where their youngsters develop. Now, this is a male rhinoceros beetle that I found. And I actually put him on this wood because I found him poking with his bum out of a hole. And what they do, male rhinoceros beetles, is they bore these about pea-sized diameter or pea diameter size holes into the rotting deadwood in places like orchards. And the male will guard as the female goes in to lay and to excavate. He will sit at the entrance hole, wedged in, making sure that no one else comes to mate with his female. And so I carefully popped him out to have a look at him. And he, it was a nice sunny day, so I had an opportunity to just put him just next to where I found him, take a few photographs, and then pop him back. But these are one of our larger beetle species in Britain, and one which are, quite intrinsically linked to orchards, particularly traditional orchards where deadwood has been allowed to flourish. And one of the biggest changes we've seen, over the last few decades across the whole of the British countryside is a real tidiness, something that Ben McDonald's in my co-author in his other book has coined as ecological tidiness disorder, where we tidy away things like deadwood. And deadwood is as important as livewood. It provides for so many different species. And just by leaving areas of deadwood, both in the trees as standing deadwood and on the ground as rotting deadwood, it provides for species, beautiful species like the rhinoceros beetle.
It's incredible how many species could be supported from one piece of deadwood, as I understand.
Yeah.
And what struck me reading through the book was how, I suppose, it made me feel like an orchard could be a microcosm of just how wild our British landscapes could be, or our woodlands even, if they were left and less managed, I suppose. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, both Ben and I feel that, traditional orchards are essentially wood pasture, and wood pasture is a habitat type that we used to have across huge swathes of the British Isles. And, as man, increasingly shaped the land through farming and development, a lot of that was lost. And places like orchards are where these species have thrived because they replicate a habitat that was there long before people started shaping the landscape that we now look at as the countryside.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're almost like a sort of a midway point, I suppose, between a completely manicured, intensive farming area
Yeah, and,
and a
and orchards
wildwood.
became accidental nature reserves for these rarer declining species that thrived in those habitats which were disappearing.
Mm. And so this little guy here, what's he feeding on in that deadwood?
So the adult actually feeds on tree saps, tree resins, but the youngsters will, they sort of look like a maggot, a larva, and they'll be feeding within the wood, working their way through the deadwood before they molt out into their adult form.
Okay.
So they rely on it. The rhinoceros beetle needs both live trees and dead trees to complete its whole life cycle.
Mm. And if our viewers go out into their orchard and try to spot this guy, what are they looking for? Is it the pointy nose?
Yes, so this is obviously a bird's eye view of this species, but if we rotated that picture 90 degrees, the male in particular does have a very pointy nose, just like a rhinoceros. I mean, there's very few other British species that you would mistake a male rhinoceros beetle with. They're quite quite identifiable from that unique facial structure.
And a horn by the look of it?
Yes, they've got a bit of a horn on the top and a very big horn on the nose, and they're about an inch long or so, maybe just over an inch long.
Okay.
So
That's
quite
a
a
stunning
big
photo as well with the texture of the wood there. Really beautiful. I'm glad you took him out and didn't take a picture of his bum poking out.
yeah, that made for a less exciting picture. The other texture in the wood there, that's been made by other species of bark beetle. There are a lot of other different species. So some of the bigger trails might have been made by larvae of the rhinoceros beetle, but there's probably 4 or 5 plus different species that have contributed to what you see in that one photograph there.
Right. Wow. Amazing. Gosh. Almost looks like an eroded riverbank. So many grooves in there. Amazing.
Yeah, and those species just work together to gradually break down that deadwood until there's nothing left.
Mm. Okay, should we go on to the next species?
So the picture number 2 is a picture of a redstart. So this is a male redstart. He's actually holding, I think, as a false click beetle, one of the species, one of the invertebrate species that we find in the orchard. And again, redstarts are a species that are declining rapidly across the British countryside. They've been amber listed by the British Trust for Ornithology in the past 2 or even 3 assessments, and there are various reasons contributing to the decline of this species, but one of them is habitat loss and nesting sites that they need, loss of those, and a reduction in their prey base, because I'm sure you've seen, and our listeners have seen, the loss of invertebrate biomass has been staggering over the last few decades, and those are species that are feeding birds like the redstart.
So by preserving that dead wood, we're providing habitat for the invertebrates, which is food for the birds.
Exactly.
All linked together.
It's all intrinsically linked. And the incredible thing about species like redstarts and other migratory songbirds is this is a species which arrives here sort of around April time. It's flown here from sub-Saharan Africa, and after that monumental migration, it arrives, it's hungry, and the males arrive, they set up their territories, they have to defend their territory against other male redstarts, and the female arrives and he has to provide food for her as she's laying up her eggs, and so they as soon as they arrive, they need that abundance of invertebrates to find and fuel their nesting season, and they producing chicks, they're feeding their chicks throughout June, and then come late summer, they have to stock up and with enough food to fly back again. And
Mm.
it's really important that the habitats that they live in provide for them, and that needs insects. It needs their prey base.
Mm. Okay. Would they also feed on any of the stone fruit or crab apples or anything else that's growing in the orchard?
Not in the period that they're there. Redstarts don't really feed on soft fruit like other species that stay here over the winter. Species like bullfinches, absolutely, they thrive on the stone fruit and the soft fruit. But redstarts, very much an insect specialist, and
Right.
that's what they need for their breeding cycle when they're here. So
Mm.
what the fruit trees provide for them are the insect prey base, and particularly the cavities. Redstarts are a cavity nesting species. They need a nice deep cavity, a rotting cavity within the wood. They will take to nest boxes as well if you provide nesting box sites for them. And they can be found in urban areas, but it's down to the migration memory of where the populations still persist, and whether or not the habitat is suitable in terms of nesting opportunities and prey base for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um,
Mm.
and they're a beautiful species.
Yeah, I was going to say fairly easy to spot if you are lucky enough to have a redstart visit your orchard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they, fantastic, coloration in the male. The females are more of an olive color, but they've got quite a distinctive call that sounds a little bit like a marbles being tapped together when they make their alarm call.
Oh.
But finding a redstart in the blossom season, just it's a wonderful thing to see. And traditional orchards do provide everything that a redstart needs.
Yeah. Oh, so special to see one of those. Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Okay. So what's our next image?
next picture. So this isn't one of mine or Ben pictures. This is a photo by a chap called Paul Harcourt Davies that we bought this in just to show how important hornets are. So this is a European hornet, Vespa crabro, and these are our largest species of wasp in the British Isles. And they're really important in orchards. They do a number of different roles. They're a predator, and they're a herbivore as well. When later in the season, they are one of the species that will eat soft fruit and thrive on soft fruit later in the season. But over the peak of the summer, when they are nesting, and they are active carnivores, seeking out things like honeybees and butterflies.
Wow.
to take back and feed to their developing young in their nest.
Right. Wow. He looks pretty fierce, doesn't he?
There. Yeah. Hornets have a really fierce reputation, and they are very efficient predators. But you'd be very unlucky to be stung by a hornet. They're actually incredibly placid. They really are flight rather than fight species. They don't want to be in a conflict, and they are pretty docile, and you can actually sit relatively near to a hornet nest as long as you're calm and watch them. And that's something I've done many times in the orchard. And seeing the wonderful textures, because they're one of those species that pulps papier-mâché, pulps wood pulp into papier-mâché and makes this layered nest with all of the different textures and colors of the wood that they've used to make a sort of insulated fortress for their youngsters inside. They're a wonderful species to just sit back and watch, and they're not really liked by beekeepers. I'm also a beekeeper, and hornets are very efficient at waiting outside a beehive and killing honeybees. But a healthy honeybee hive can easily withstand the predation pressures of a few hornets. So they are a carnivore in the orchard, an insect carnivore. During the summer, but then come the autumn, they switch to soft fruit, and they will readily work their way through things like windfall apples. Again, to stock up to get them through the winter, for the queens to get through the winter.
So excuse my ignorance here, but presumably then they don't feed on pollen from the blossom?
I don't know whether they would feed on pollen. That's a good question, actually. I think they probably would be able to feed on pollen. Other species of wasp are able to feed on pollen. I'd have to defer to someone who spent a little bit longer studying the hornet.
No, it sounds like they prefer a meatier meal anyway.
But particularly when they're feeding their youngsters, that's when they need a meatier
Right.
meal.
And he's sort of standing on some lichen. Is he?
Exactly, yeah. So that's a piece of. We're trying to work out where it is. We think it's a Mediterranean fruit grove, that one, but it's obviously a deadwood stump that's got a
Right.
variety of species. And lichens again. We've got a fantastic diversity of lichens in the UK, and for people that don't know, they've got a similar set up to corals, and that it's a symbiotic relationship that lives inside a lichen to allow it to grow. And so you get all of these different shapes of lichen,
That's
and
fascinating. Yeah.
they, in that picture there are probably 3 different species that I can see, but again, I'm not a lichen expert, but
Mm.
old growth woodlands support an amazing variety of lichens. So old growth traditional orchards equally support a fantastic variety of old lichens.
Mm. Since you touched upon fungi, we haven't selected any images of fungi today, but I just wondered which types of fungi you came across while observing the orchard.
Well, yeah, we regularly come across many different species of fungi in the orchard, and obviously, autumn, October is a great time to go and see them.
Mm.
Bracket fungi, but one of the best, one of the most exciting ones we come across is chicken of the woods, which is a very distinctive large fungi, and also edible, I believe, but not that I've tried it.
Yeah.
But fungi are again essential, particularly the smaller ones that you don't see, the ones that contribute to the things like the dry rot that works its way through some of the orchard trees when they're dying, and that helps provide the softwood needed for excavating species like woodpeckers. And obviously, you've also got the fungi that live in the soil, the mycorrhizal network, and a healthy mycorrhizal network is essential and it has an intrinsic relationship with a healthy woodland, and this is a wood pasture landscape. So once you get into the soils in an orchard, it will tell you an awful lot. And so a traditional organic cider orchard will have very healthy soils, and it's a really complete mycorrhizal network helping the different trees communicate and pulling up nutrients and redistributing nutrients around the orchard.
Okay. Did you come across the orchard tooth crust, which, as I understand, is quite a rare fungi?
No, we haven't.
Orchards.
No, I haven't personally come across the orchard tooth crust yet. But I will, the more time I spend in the orchard, every time, Ben or I go to the orchard, we find a new species, and we just almost every time each time we go, something new appears. So I'll keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, let us know. Or could we get a great photo from you? That would be good.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
I think for me, it wins one of the best names as well out there for fungi.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go and look it up straight away.
All right, so let's go on to the last image.
So this one is taken by a friend of Ben and mine. So this is a lesser spotted woodpecker. Lesser spotted woodpeckers are our smallest species of woodpecker, and they are now unfortunately very rare. This bird, although it looks like its cousin, the great spotted woodpecker, that bird is about the size of a house sparrow. They are teeny, and they suffered a number of threats over the past few decades that have contributed to their decline. But habitat fragmentation and predation pressure from their larger cousin, the great spot, are 2 of the reasons that they have declined. But they absolutely need deadwood. They are a species that almost all of their foraging is done in deadwood, and all of their breeding behavior completely depends on having deadwood sites that they can excavate their cavities in. And traditional orchards which allow standing deadwood still provide for species like the lesser spotted woodpecker. I was actually away when Ben found this nest. He was walking through the orchard. This was in 2016. He was walking through the orchard looking for the nest, and he heard it. One way of finding woodpecker nests is just to walk quietly up and down a favoured piece of habitat, standing by every tree and listening, because for a few weeks before the chicks fledge, you can hear them chattering inside the nest cavity. And if you're within about 10 meters of the tree that they've chosen to nest in, it's quite easy to hear the chattering youngsters as they're waiting for their next meal. So this was how Ben found this particular nest. And I was away, so he called our friend Sam up, and Sam went up to the orchard and took this photo of them.
I'm surprised. I thought you were going to say he heard the hammering of the pecking.
Yeah, but you can hear that too, but often they don't do that anywhere near the nest. They tend to do that earlier in the season, when they're sort of demonstrating to other woodpeckers in the area where their territory is, and when they're trying to, I guess, call for a mate as well. That will let the different woodpecker territories know where their boundaries are.
And what's the main purpose of the hammering on the wood, the pecking?
It's a territorial call. So the shallow pecking, you just hear like a tap 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 tap. They'll work down a tree trunk. That's when they're looking for food. But when you hear the really loud drumming, that is that's a signal, done by the woodpeckers to indicate to other woodpeckers where their territory is, and to communicate, but basically between woodpeckers.
Okay. And would you find the greater spotted in an orchard as well, or just the lesser spotted?
No, I mean, great spotteds thrive in orchards as well. They are a species, that relies on relatively similar habitat to the lesser spotted woodpecker. We also find green woodpeckers in the orchard as well. And unfortunately, the great spotteds are lovely to look at, but they are a very efficient predator. And I've sat and watched as they've drilled away at the nests of lesser spotted woodpeckers, great tits, blue tits, and for a short window each year, they are very efficient carnivores. In a similar way to the hornets, they are looking for chicks to pull out of the cavities of those species to feed to their own chicks. And in fact, there's a plate in the book in the middle you'll see of a great spotted woodpecker carrying the body of a blue tit or a great tit, which it was going to feed to its own youngsters.
Yes, I've just found it.
Yeah, so it's a bit grisly, but the great spotted woodpecker will listen for the smaller cavity nesting species. It will then, dig out a small hole to excavate the chicks from the nest, and it will then wedge them into a little tree gap somewhere and start tearing them up and bring back a leg or a wing at a time, or a head, to feed to its own youngsters, to give them that protein boost that they need before they fledge.
Right, it's the ugly side of nature, the drama.
It certainly is, and it's quite surprising when you're sitting there with your, I build these special rigs that hold, a camera looking at the nest hole, and when I'm sitting looking at the image and you see what's about to come in, it's quite a shock. You think the woodpecker's just going to come in with things like beetle larvae and other invertebrates, but then it comes in with a whole head of a great tit chick, and it's quite grisly, but also really cool to see how these different species interact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We always paint the picture of an orchard as quite a relaxing, idyllic space that's good for our well-being. We've got to remember it's not just the humans using it, and there are slightly more morbid dramas playing out.
Yeah, there certainly are. And you'll see that we've put in quite a few of those stories in the book too.
Absolutely. Oh, fantastic. Well, that was so fascinating. It's amazing just to learn about all these different creatures there, and not just that, but how they relate to each other, how they relate to the fruit trees, what they need from the orchard and why they're there. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those photos with us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I mean,
just to say, there's plenty more of those photos in the book as well, so do go out and buy it.
Yep, please do. We'd be delighted.
Just a question for you. I suppose some of our viewers might be thinking about their own orchards and the groups that they volunteer in, and a lot of those are in urban settings. So they may be wondering, well, how can we make our orchard as wild as this one, or attract as many interesting species? Would you have any advice on that?
Yeah, so I've also got a tiny orchard of my own. It's got 7 trees in, and it's very young. And the exciting thing about planting an orchard wherever you plant it, mine's in a very urban setting, is that you're planting sort of a gift for the next generation, really. And there are various ways of speeding up the wildlife value of an orchard. Deadwood, I would say, is the number one most important thing that you can do to immediately add wildlife value to an orchard. Allowing deadwood to remain on trees as it forms, and even bringing in deadwood to stack, and leaving things like log piles, and leaving long areas of grass, and encouraging some of that apple and pear and pear produce and other soft fruit produce to stay on the ground, and leaving it on the ground for the wildlife. We grow orchards because we want the fruit, but leaving a set aside for wildlife. Species like bullfinches do very well in urban areas. They'll find fruit trees very quickly, and they will come back year on year. As soon as those trees are starting to produce fruit, they will be straight into them. All sorts of thrush species that do very well in urban areas, song thrushes, the winter thrushes like redwings and fieldfares, they will quickly find orchards as well. And as soon as they're in fruit, and as soon as the winter thrushes have come in, and particularly over the winter, that fruit is a really important source of food for them. Invertebrates, some of the larger hawk moths, for example, that we really enjoy finding in urban areas. In my own garden, I've got eyed hawk moth caterpillars, which I found just a few weeks ago feeding on one of my small apple trees. And these are those fantastic big lime green caterpillars that you sometimes see. And the moths are as impressive, huge moths with very large eye spots on their lower wings. So if you're setting out and looking at planting an urban orchard, make sure you leave some deadwood around and some longer grass areas, and leave some fallen fruit when you're lucky enough to have your young orchard producing fruit. And that should put you in good stead to start increasing the sort of species that are using the orchard space that you're making.
Fantastic, that's really good advice, thank you. Amazing. Yeah, and also I was wondering about the borders, or how you demarcate the area. And there's quite a big section on the hedgerows in the book as well, so I suppose that might be something, do you think people could consider around the
absolutely edge? Absolutely. If you've got space to put in hedgerows, and you're able to leave that area, thick hedgerows, 3, 4, 5 meter wide hedgerows around the outside of an area, and that's what we have in this orchard, are fantastic habitats. Species like long-tailed tits, blackbirds, goldfinches will all nest in these thickets that you get in established hedgerows. Species like hawthorn and blackthorn provide both pollen in the spring and nectar in the spring, and they provide fruit later in the season with their sloe berries or hawthorn berries. Other species like dog rose that clamber up through hedgerows, honeysuckle which can clamber up the outside of hedgerows, all help provide across the season. When you're looking to provide spaces for wildlife, it's important to look at the 3 things they need. They need somewhere to breed, somewhere to feed, and somewhere to hide. And if you can give wildlife those 3 things, then there's a really good chance that you'll get as many new species as possible into your area, and making sure you've got food for them across the whole season. So, species like hawthorn and blackthorn, which blossom very early, species like willow, which provide really early pollen and nectar, all the way through to the fruiting trees, which provide food at the end of the season. When you've got all of that realm covered, then there's a really good chance that you're providing as much as you can for the species that will use your orchard as much as you will.
Absolutely. It's I think one massive takeaway is the deadwood from today, from this interview.
Yeah, it's got to be the most undervalued habitat, because it provides for so many species. Someone like the oak tree is said to support 350 invertebrate species, but half of those live on the deadwood, or over half of those live on the deadwood element of the oak.
Right.
So, deadwood is critical to healthy ecosystems.
So stop tidying. That's our message.
Yeah, stop tidying. It doesn't need to be nature. Nature likes a mess.
There's actually, I think the last line of the section in autumn has something about that. Where is it? Oh yes. autumn is a month of hyperabundance where every scruffy orchard inch yields life. So
Superb.
I like
Yep.
the keyword scruffy there.
Yeah, exactly. Sums it up very, very poignantly. That is exactly what we need. Scruffy spaces.
Brilliant. Well, just to say as well that Nick has kindly given us a signed copy of the book Orchard, A Year in England's Eden. So if you have a look at the link underneath this interview, there'll be more details of how you can enter the prize draw to win that. But if not, go out, buy it anyway. It's out there in all your major bookstores. And I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, that covers it. That covers it well. Yeah, it's in Waterstones. It's on Hive. Have a look for it, and please let us know what you think. Ben and I can be found on Twitter. Ben is at Rebirding1, and I'm at NT Gates. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the book.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us, especially while you're out on a shoot. It's been really, really fascinating to talk to you. And I feel like I could chat for another half an hour, but
yeah. No, well, thank you, and thanks for the work that you and the team are doing at the Orchard Project. It's something we wholly support and endorse, and we look forward to seeing more projects that you're working on that come out in the future.
Oh, amazing! Thank you. All right. Well, we'll speak to you soon, Nick, and pass our regards and thanks to Ben as well.
Will do. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.